This time we're going to talk about the third type of a selection, if, else, if, else. We're going to expand our if statement to allow us to have multiple buckets. It'll look something like this. The if has a condition on it with a bucket, and if that condition is true, we execute that. We're going to add this new condition called an else if. Notice there's a space between the else and the if. Because there is an if, there is another condition. If this condition is true, it will drop into this bucket and execute this logic. And then finally we have our default, or I should say our optional else on the end. This is how I have created three buckets. One of the three will execute. It evaluates the first one, and if that condition is not true, then it evaluates the second one. If that condition is not true, it'll execute the optional else at the end. So let's give this a try. So we're going to write a program that allows us to prompt the user for their grade percent, like 90% or 23.2% or 18% in the class, and we're going to give them a statement based upon what they input. Now, I have the main structure of a Java program, and I've also written some pseudocode. This is what we want to do. For grades between 90 and 100 or over 100, we're going to tell them they did an excellent. For those between 80 and 90, we're going to tell them that very good. From 74 to 80, we'll tell them it's a passing grade. And for everything 74 or under 74, we're going to tell them they have to retake the class. I can see four buckets here. And so I'm going to use an if, else if structure in order to create four buckets. So let's come back up here and let's fill in my pseudocode. If I am going to capture a grade, I should probably have a variable to capture it. And once again, if I am going to capture it, I probably need a scanner. If I need a scanner, I should import a scanner above my class. So I have imported the scanner. The grade can be a floating point, so I'm going to make it double. I'm just going to call it a grade, and I'll set it equal to our default value, and I am going to create a scanner. I call my scanner's response, and so I'm going to prompt the user for their grade. So I'm just going to ask them to enter their current grade, and then I am going to give them an example of what I would like them to key in. I don't want them to put the percent sign on there, and so I'm not going to use the word percent. And now I'm going to capture that in the variable that I created called grade. So now I'm going to build these buckets using an if statement. And the first if statement is, if the grade is between 90 and 100, I'm actually going to allow them to key in anything over 100. So the condition is going to be if grade is greater than 90. I'm going to include 90 in this, so I'm going to say greater than or equal to 90. So we'll say you're getting an A, excellent grade. Now I'm going to create my second bucket using the statement else, but I'm going to include an if, and whenever I have an if, I always need a condition on the if. Now I'm looking for grades between 80 and 90. The one thing I know is that if they got a grade 90 or better, it will drop into the first bucket. And so I don't actually have to say between 80 and 90. All I have to do is say grade greater than 80. I'm going to use the equal sign too because I want to include the here. I don't have to explicitly say that it has to be less than 90 because if it was 90 or better, it dropped into the if bucket. And what I'm going to tell these students, I pasted that onto my clipboard, and what I'm going to tell these students is you're getting a B, very good, you work hard. So I have my print statement. So you might say to yourself, I'm going to put the default else on the end here. But I can actually repeat the use of the else if to create multiple buckets. I need 4 buckets, and if I typed an else on the end of here, I would only have 3 buckets. And so you're going to find out that we can repeat this else if over and over again in order to create more than 3 buckets. So the condition inside of here needs to be everything between 74 and 80. So if I say that grade is greater than or equal to 74, not 70, but 74, I would be inclined to want to say grades less than 80, but the way that the if else if works, that if it drops into one of the buckets, it executes that bucket, and if it doesn't, it automatically evaluates the second bucket. Well, if it was greater than 90, it would have dropped into the first bucket, so I don't need to check for values less than 90, only greater than 80. If it was greater than 80, it would have dropped into the second bucket, so I don't need to test to see if the grade is less than 80. So I'm going to add another print statement. This time I'm saying you are getting a C. That is a passing grade in CS. All right, so I have my print statement. I have 3 buckets because I repeated the else if. Then I'm going to add my default else. I don't need a condition on the else because the else will execute if it did not drop into one of the buckets. The only way that it will get to this else is if the grade is less than 74. And so I'm going to say you're getting an E. You'll have to retake the class because CS majors are required to get a 74 or better to pass. We have 4 buckets using the if, else if, else if, else. I wonder how many else ifs I could put in the center of there. Do you think I could say if, else if, else if, else if? I mean, do you think that I could have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 buckets just repeating the value of else if? If you said yes, then you're absolutely right. You may think that the only thing that I can put inside of an if or an else if bucket are print statements because that seems to be the only thing that I'm putting inside of there. But we can actually put other if statements inside of an if statement. This is called nesting. So inside of the else statement, if they are going to have to retake the class, I'm going to add a little bit of pseudocode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to prompt them for the question, are you willing to work harder? And then I'm going to capture their answer. And if they're willing to work harder, we'll tell them and they'll get a better grade and we'll pass the class. Otherwise, we're going to tell them that they're going to have to retake the class next semester. And in order to prompt them for something and capture it, I'm going to need a new variable. So I'm going to come back up here to the top and I'm going to create a string variable. I'll call it work harder. I'm going to set it equal to a null value. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to prompt them for hard work, whether or not they're going to work harder for the rest of the semester. As always, I'm going to, inside of the prompt, I'm going to give them an example of what I would like their input to look like. And then I'm going to capture their response in that variable that I created called work harder using my scanner. I'm going to use the dot next because I just expect them to key in one single word. So now I'm going to say if they're willing to work harder, they'll get a better grade and they will pass the class. So I have an if statement inside of here with my opening and my closing brace. The condition on the if statement says that if work harder dot equals, and we're going to use equals ignore case, because if they type in a capital yes or a lowercase yes, or if they have a camel case yes, if they accidentally have their caps lock on and they type in lowercase y, capital yes, I want to ignore all of those cases, and the only thing that I want to look for is the word yes. The equals ignore case will allow me to do that. So inside of here I'm going to print something like excellent, you'll get a better grade and pass the class. And then I'm going to add that default else on the end. It doesn't have a condition, so if they type in anything except yes, I'll say something like, you will have to retake the class next semester. All right, so we have this if-else nested inside of the else statement that was at the very bottom. And I did this because I want you to know that we can nest anything inside of an if, else if bucket. We can put anything in there, including additional if, else statements. The next thing we're going to look at is if I have more than 4 buckets. Let's say that I have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 buckets. We're going to explore another structure that's available to us besides the if, else if, and it's called the switch.